Well, Jen, it has been such a fun ride. I have loved, this is one of my favorite projects I've ever collaborated on anyone with. So I just want to start by
Oh,
saying
Jeff.
thanks for involving me. And you're such a brilliant interviewer. And what's been really fun for me is to be introduced to so many amazing thought leaders that have actually changed the way I work as well. And I know also in your capacity, you've had some wonderful breakthroughs with guests too that we'll be talking about in just a minute. But before we talk about that, I want to ask you, can you let us in to what it's been like for you to create out loud, specifically with this show?
Well, first of all, thank you for being amazing, Jeff. And everybody, Jeff also produces the screenwriting show. No,
The Screenwriting Life is what it's
the
called.
Screenwriting Life, which is a wonderful show if you're a screenwriter, incredible, or a writer of any kind. And they are huge fans of Jeff as their producer. And one of the women of the show, their mother only listens to the show because she wants to hear Jeff. So I love that.
I want to say quickly too, you mentioned the Screenwriting Life. Jen has an episode on that podcast, which is wonderful. Our fans and Megan Lorian cite it as one of their favorites. So,
oh no, man, thanks for making me feel good this morning.
Totally. It was such a breakthrough, a really important episode for our fans to just talk about like the self-compassion elements of creation that I think has become a fundamental theme of this show too. So
it has. I was thinking about that this morning on my run, how self-compassion keeps showing up in so many of the interviews. And it's a lifelong process to learn. How do we be more compassionate with ourselves? And especially when the thing about the creative life is you try things and they don't always work. I mean, you're about to go into production on a film. Yep. And I started off in filmmaking, how often you have something planned for the day and it doesn't work.
Especially in filmmaking. I think like compromise and open-mindedness and just like enjoying the ride, maybe in more than any other creative medium, is an essential part of filmmaking.
So true. That gave me chills. It's so true because there's so many people and so many different personalities and intentions that you're working with, but also just so much stuff happens. The weather changes, someone's voice is scratchy, the line that you thought was brilliant comes out of their mouth, but it sounds like nothing but blah. So that self-compassion is something I've really learned. I also think I'm always learning to work with my learning differences. And so pronouncing people's names, not freaking out that I can't pronounce their names. I did that more in the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
So that's been huge. And trusting myself more, when I've end each of these interviews that people have been like, that's the best interview, or I haven't been asked those questions before. Mm-hmm. And so I still do a lot of prep. I'm digging for things. I'm digging for ideas that people haven't talked about, but trusting myself more to have more of a conversation. That feels like that's growing.
That self-trust element, it's been fun to watch you even grow in that. And it's also
you've commented on that a couple of times when we're done with an interview. And you're like, wow, you were really more relaxed, maybe you said, or.
Right. And it's also interesting for me to hear you. First of all, thanks for sharing and letting us into your personal journey with your own learning disability and how it can affect your confidence. But it also shows me that inner critic and that inner voice is so much louder than what's actually being seen on the page or in conversation, because I view you as such a sharp and astute talker. Like, I feel like that disability that I know is it's probably ringing so loud in the back of your head. I just never even see it showing up. And I don't want to undermine or devalue probably the challenge of working with that, but also just, I think sometimes that inner critic or those blemishes that we see in our own work that feels so loud might not even be showing up for our audience.
And, when you have told me that in gentle ways, when we're finished recording, I'll be like, wow, I really feel like I blew that, or I missed the best questions, or there was just so much to ask and I couldn't get it all in. And you always say something very gentle, but it feels really honest, like you're not just gilding the lily, as we say. And that helps. And I think that's a big takeaway for me is I tend to go it alone a lot in my creative process because I'm a writer primarily. So I'll just put my head down and go, and trying, like, collaborating with you has been really joyful. And like, can you have more of that? Right? The question we always ask ourselves, can I actually let more of what I want in?
I mean, I feel the same way. It's interesting as a producer to have such a smart creative collaborator. I work on some shows and they don't know how to record audio, or they don't necessarily have creative opinions. And it's been not only great to work with someone who can like send me beautifully edited shows, to help me put them together, but has it contributes and offers opinions in a way that does feel collaborative. I think when you're building your creative community, and it's so important to have one, find people who you kind of are on the same wavelength with,
Yeah.
because they're out there, and having them, I think, is greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, I agree. Well said.
Well, speaking of well said, I want to get into some of these amazing moments with our guests. First of all, I want to talk about Anne-Laure Le Cunff. I know for you, that was a really kind of breakthrough interview. And also, just personally, I'll say for me too, I didn't know Anne-Laure Le Cunff's work at all. And she had so many amazing and generous things to say about what it means to create. But I want to start with this clip about toxic originality.
Creativity is combinational in nature. It's always about combining other ideas. And something that's I love the term you just used, and I agree, it's very toxic. It's this misconception that creativity is this inspirational muse that is going to come and whisper something completely new to your ear, and then you're going to create it. Whereas it doesn't work like that. Usually, most of what is perceived as original is a combination of ideas from people who came before you. And what you can usually do, and this is one of the best ways to bring value, is to just kind of like share your own different tweak or angle on an idea, add a little something, improve on stuff that you've seen done before. And that's an amazing contribution to make. And sometimes I see lots of people who don't even get started with creating content or creating anything in general because they say, I don't have any original ideas. And I tell them, you don't need to. Even curation is amazing and is needed. Curating the three key ideas of an author and presenting them in one article for someone to get that very quickly, that's incredibly valuable as well. So there's so many ways to create. The only one that I don't believe in is having an idea that just comes out of thin air and that is completely original and that no human being has had before.
I didn't actually realize that she had written about toxic originality, or my biggest fear is I actually read it and then thought that I coined the term. Do you have that? Do you worry about that? Like, you take in so much information, you're like, oh my God, I'm so want to make sure I always give credit where credit is due to whomever affects and influences my thinking. But that term came out of my mouth one day. Again, I think it was after a run. And just this idea that I see stops so many people that I work with to get them to express themselves, which is if it's have to never been said before. And I'm sorry, that's impossible. I mean, do you feel that about your filmmaking, that it has to be the most original film?
It's both. I hear that inner critic telling you something has to be completely original, and then that other inner critic saying, like, you can't do it. You're not qualified to tell this story. Someone already has. And then you just have to fight through it. I mean, for me, I think what I love about this toxic originality moment is I think our inner critic will use any excuse it can, right? Like, to me, the subtext of this toxic originality idea is that you have to guard against anything that could derail you from your creative process because they're everywhere. So I think just giving yourself the permission and gift to say, like, my taste is important. The art that I already love has curated my own originality, and that's an important part of creation. The things I love have created taste, and I'm going to use that to curate what I'm making.
That's brilliant. I also think, especially for people listening who identify as women, is owning your own experiences. It's difficult to slow down and pay attention to the things that interest you or affected you or have stayed with you, and slow down enough to capture them in some way and build on them with your thoughts, or bring in these other maker experiences. And we tend to dismiss our own experiences.
Totally.
And
I think too, like, for our maybe newer creatives or kind of emerging creatives, I think so much of finding our creative voice is cobbling together the ideas of people we already love and the voices of people we already love. And Ira Glass talks about this is the reason so many creatives quit is because they have really, really good taste.
I love that quote.
It's so great. It's this idea that we love these huge benchmarks of amazing art and we want to have that same voice. But when we get to the page, we don't have the experience or the craft skills yet to achieve that level. So the gap between our ability of craft and our taste is so wide. So we just need to keep writing and pushing through it so that eventually our abilities match our taste.
And I think on top of that, I would add, and I wrote about this in my book, Why Bother? We have to learn as humans and creatives to live in that gap with self-compassion, which is why I think self-compassion keeps coming up on the show, because that gap is always there. I don't care how much experience and craft you have. If you're going to keep growing, you're like, and now I'm going to do this. I mean, we just watched American Utopia, the David Byrne Broadway show that Spike Lee filmed for HBO. It is transcendent. I cried, I laughed, I danced. Now I was a huge Talking Head fan. That's my generation. But they took a Broadway show and made it into an amazing filmed experience. Now, you have to know that was a new edge for both those creators. Mm-hmm. And it sounded like such a bad idea. Who hasn't seen a badly filmed live show, and been like, oh God. Mm-hmm. It was stunning. If we don't keep growing, we're not going to keep creating, because creatives are by nature essentially curious people.
Mm-hmm. And I think that point is so important, Jen, about the fact that gap between what we envision and what we're in the process creating is a wide one. Mm-hmm. And what I've found is I've been lucky to work and engage with high level creators is that I almost find that the more accomplished they are, the more insecure they feel on the page in those early drafts, those early
Really?
Well, you hear about like Anne Lamott, and I mean, we just spoke with Maggie Shipstead, and who did we just speak with?
Lori Frankel.
Yeah, Lori Frankel, who's like a multi-time New York Times bestselling author. And they talk about that first draft is just getting through it, pushing through the muck and just getting it on the page and recognizing and giving yourself compassion around these shitty first drafts. So I think hearing these hugely accomplished creatives talk about that so candidly has been such a gift that your show has given us.
Oh, thank you. And I remember the moment for me. I was writing a magazine column for, at the time it was called, I forgot the name of the magazine, but it got bought by Martha Stewart. And so I had to write a monthly column, and I was on vacation with my family, and I got up early to write, and my husband came out and said, how's it going? I'm like, oh, it sucks. And he's like, oh, I'm so sorry. And I looked at him really curiously, like, oh no, there's not a problem. I just know my process now. I know that the first draft is going to be boring and insipid and completely unoriginal. And I realized in that moment, I had come so far in my writing career that I could let that be okay. And I think that's what Annie Lamont's interview really gave us. She's written 17 New York Times bestsellers now, something
like insane number.
Insane number. And she's just like, yeah, it's still that critical voice, but she just doesn't get caught in it anymore.
That's so well said. We've been talking on the screenwriting show about how your first draft, we initially use the term barf draft or vomit draft, but the more generous version we've been saying lately is the birth draft. And
I like that.
The process of birth is so messy, and
it is. I've done it. It is.
Yeah, not to get graphic, but there's fluid and there's screaming, but you create this beautiful thing, and you know that it's going to grow and change and evolve. So as you are birthing your first draft of whatever it is, know that just like in real life childbirth, you're doing something physical and exciting and beautiful in exactly what it is and it's meant to be.
And we're so uncomfortable with ugliness. Mm-hmm. That's where that self-compassion comes in again, just to love that ugliness and know that it'll become something else.
I mean, even when you think about newborns, I think we have this cultural idea that they're these beautiful little creations. And of course they are, but they often
are ugly.
I know. They kind of, if we're being honest, a fresh newborn baby kind of looks like an alien who's confused and trying to figure out where they are.
E.T.
But they're beautiful in their own way. So it's like, know that your first draft might kind of look like a confused alien, but it's beautiful in its own way.
I love that.
Well, speaking of that, I think we should talk about Rissi Palmer, who,
Oh, yeah.
Jen, just what was your experience like interviewing Rissi Palmer?
Well, I fell in love with her song Seed. So I was a little later to her music. And then her story of Color Me Country, which is just continues to explode even since we did the episode with her in April. And when she was so generous with how forthcoming she was about her struggles, an archetypal story of, I had gotten made at, 28 or 27 and then crash, bang, boom. And I loved how she took responsibility for her own role in what happened with her first label and the court case, and then really recreating herself from this very generous place, but also for me, like, this is the lesson I had to learn over and over again.
Yeah.
No one's coming to save you. Totally. Stop waiting for the gatekeeper.
Let's go ahead and listen to that moment from Rissi.
Yeah, I was starting from scratch. I get a phone call from my attorney and he's like, Rissi, I am so sorry. He's like, I've been arguing with this guy for like the last couple hours, but they feel like they can't work with you because they'd have to start all over again with you because you don't have a built-in following already and that sort of thing. And so they're going to pass. I was devastated for like a week. Just like devastated. And I was like, I don't ever want to feel that again. I don't ever want to feel that.
Yes,
I'm not, no one else is holding up anything that I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
No one else is going to keep me from moving forward when I want to move forward. And I'm just not going to be holding to that anymore. There's no one coming to save you.
I'm not going to be waiting for any gatekeeper.
So I was like, if I have to wait for this, then I'm never going to make music again. And so from the release of Backport Sessions to today, like I'm very down on people not doing for themselves if they can.
I mean, I wrote about that again in my last book, Why Bother? Because for me, that was the huge moment. I had a lot of early success with my books, and then I kept wanting to be chosen again, right? And then I finally got chosen by Oprah in the late 90s. And I was like, this is it. This is it. I've been anointed. But no one else can choose you. You have to choose yourself, or you don't have the integrity to go into that ugliness we were just talking about. You don't have the drive, because if it is not coming intrinsically from inside of you, the creative process itself has to draw you forward. And if you're focused on the deal or the interview or, getting on Brené's podcast or whatever it is in today's world, you're going to lose the ability to keep going through the ugly.
Oof, write that down. I'm putting exactly what you just said above my desk.
Go through the ugly.
I was just listening to an interview with Bo Burnham, who is a really interesting filmmaker. And he just released this special on Netflix called Inside that he shot and edited in his own home during the pandemic. And it's incredible. But
what's it on?
It's on Netflix.
Okay.
Yeah, it's worth checking out. It's a little bleak because it's such a sharp observation of the experience of what it was like to be locked inside.
Oh, maybe I'll wait a little while to watch it until the experience fades.
Until it's gone. It's really funny, but a little dark. But what he did, he was doing an interview around, press for the project. And he was saying, someone was like, what's the greatest lesson you've learned in the last 15 years? And what he said was, when I was in 6th grade doing my school play, or when I was getting paid millions of dollars by Netflix to put this project together, they were the same thing. I think we have this idea that once you make it and someone buys your work or says you're doing it, like that's when you've arrived. But the process of making and creating is the same whenever and wherever you're doing it. And I thought that was such an interesting and amazing point he made.
Oh my God. 7th grade talent show.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I did a Lily Tomlin impersonation, and I had a very embarrassing moment that I won't describe in great detail. It was a costume malfunction and I got heckled.
Wow.
In 7th grade, right? Yeah. And that's the kind of stuff I think some creatives were processing for years, and how to move past that. And how to move past those wounds and return to the intrinsic motivation and joy of the process. And the science all says process and authentic pride in your process is what keeps you going. Not the awards, not the deals, not the downloads for the podcast, but go ahead and download all the episodes. and subscribe and tell all your friends.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just choosing yourself and choosing the process. I
Choosing
love
yourself.
that Rissi interview was incredible. I mean, two other amazing guests who speak about this all the time are, of course, Megan Lorian, who produced that other show we mentioned at the top. And they talked all about the kind of sacred duty that we have to our work.
That was one of the most powerful moments in all of the first season for me. That has stuck with me. I think about that a few times a week still.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and listen to it.
And the thing that got me all my work, the sample, it even got me the Captain Marvel job, is a TV spec pilot about a guy who keeps a girl in a box under his bed.
It's fantastic, by the way. It is fantastic.
Every rep I have has said, if you had told me you were going to write that, I would have told you no. But I was obsessed and so curious about these women who get kidnapped as young girls and then never leave. Like, even when the doors are open, they don't go because now the prison is inside their mind. And how are we all doing that? How are we all locked in our own ideas of the world and ourselves? And so I felt a lot of passion going in and pitching that. So guess what I'm saying is, if I'm always, the choice is my story. The choice is my passion. And if you don't like it, I love it. And by the way, this can happen even if it gets made, because you're going to get reviewed and some critics are not going to like it. And you're going to get notes and people are going to go, I don't get it. And it's like, I know, but I do. And I love it. So, you have to love it on its own for itself, because you cannot, even if you get on Oprah's list, that doesn't mean you're not going to get reviewers who don't like it, right? Like,
there's no perfect.
It is part of the the process that we're in. So for me, that's where I try to sit. I'm not saying I do it well all the time. There's days I text rant Lorian. You would need your support system to remind you, hey, it's about the work. Just go back to the work.
I mean, I felt embarrassed at the question that I asked them, because it really, I feel like the thing about being a podcast interviewer is you reveal yourself in the questions you ask. And that sometimes in retrospective, a little embarrassing. Like, I can feel my face getting hot right now because there's still a part of me that goes, pick me. And that moment with her conviction, Meg's conviction was so, just really like, okay, girl, can you live that? Can you take that in? Can you believe that? That, for me personally.
It is. I'm just curious on that aside quickly, Jen, like, what have you learned about yourself, on this show, because like you just said, the interesting thing about hosting your own show and giving these interviews is it often does say more about you, or you learn about yourself through the process.
I think that it is being welcoming to myself when I'm in the conversation that I'm learning. So if and this is really subtle, Jeff, but if I'm straining to try to, like, I don't know, make something happen or keep my shit together or appear like I'm something special or anything like that, I don't know if it ruins the interview, but it definitely means I'm exhausted at the end of it. And if I'm really present with the person and curious and listening closely, then it's flow. It's that wonderful creative flow. And I end on a high note. And I think that's just the lesson for me over and over again in life.
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things about interviewing is just turning off the stage element of what it is, and it sounds so simple, but just trying to have that conversation.
And thinking about the viewer, or the listener rather in this case, or the viewer on YouTube too, but like, I want to draw out value for them. But sometimes I can feel myself getting a little controlling or graspy, or like, oh God, that wasn't very interesting what that guest just said, or, oh, my question was stupid. And then I feel like the connection breaks on that moment. So it's really an exercise in presence.
I love that. Well, I want to let you know that moment that Meg shared that really kind of broke your brain in the best way. You gave one of those to Megan Lorian when you came on their show. It was the same exact thing, where what you spoke about was the idea that every project that we pursue is a gift because it allows us to grow. What if the thesis statement of creativity was, this is a beautiful way for you to grow in your own human, is I kind of think how you were describing it. Meg had that same reaction. We do these little post wrap-up shows for our Patreon community. And she was like, that blew my mind and broke my brain, because I've been working on this project and all I'm thinking about is, where's this going to go? Who's going to pick me? And what if I was just doing it to get better? So that was a big gift that you gave to both of them when you came on their show.
Well, I got that because I spent 4 years and 500 pages working on a memoir that failed utterly, and it became the ground for the Why Bother book. But there was so much wasted time. But then I realized there wasn't, because I became a different person, because I spent 4 years examining these moments in my life from a point of view of storytelling. And what we know about the science of storytelling is it changes our brain, so I really believe that.
I want to ask Jen, because I think so many of our listeners might feel like they're in that muck right now on their projects. Like, is there anything in retrospect that you wish you could have told yourself when you were in, 2014, buried in this manuscript, feeling like a failure?
Yes. Don't go into your creative cave alone. So I kept thinking, I will get readers, I will share this, I will get coaching when I get to a certain point. Don't do that. Complex projects need outside help. If you can't afford to hire help, do the creative community thing that you were talking about earlier. We've talked about in some of our episodes. So don't go into your creative cave alone. Know who you're creating this for. It's one thing if I was going to say, I'm going to spend 4 years figuring out my life. Great. But I was trying to write a book for other people, and I wasn't doing the algebra of that, right? The part that makes you uncomfortable, the part that's stretching. In this case, it was like, what's the actual narrative arc of this story? So if you feel like you're dodging something, stop, because you probably are, and it's going to come back and bite you in the butt. And yeah, I think those are the two things. Creative caves are bad news for any length of time. Being on our own, being alone, not being in conversation with other people, other creators, or your community. Like, I have this big community. I could have been sharing these with them and discussing it with them, and I wasn't.
I think that can be hard, though, because if we have like community or followers, we feel like we have to be like the authority on a pedestal. And if they see us be vulnerable, it'll decredify who we are as their leader or whatever.
But the only thing I think I've offered in my 30 years of doing this work is being the bumbler. Yeah. The goofy bumbler. I think that's probably my talent. So when people connect with me most, when I'm authentically like, oh God, I'm in the mess here. Not that you would ever manufacture that as a creator. Right. That would be gross.
You just let us in, though.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there was no, that's comfortable for me to do. So it's weird that I didn't do it, but I didn't.
Well, and what's true is, from a creative standpoint, we won't generate honest work if we're not being honest with the people around us,
or with ourselves.
So that's such an important lesson, Jen.
Yeah, they're also painful to learn, Jeff.
It hurts. It always hurts. It's
just, us creatives, we signed up for a big, interesting life.
I remember, I think it was you. It might have been with Megan Lorian, just talking about like, sometimes I wish I was one of those people who was programmed and wired to just like want to be an actuary, and just like love and enjoy the process of having your 9 to 5 and coming home, and kind of that's what it is. But the truth is, if you've been called by the creative gods to create, like, that's not who you are, and that's not what that is. And like, again, learn to enjoy the ride.
Yeah. Or you can be an actuary during the day, but you're still going to have to come home and create.
Yeah. It's really well
and
said.
If you deny that, it makes you sick. I don't mean necessarily physically sick, but soul sick. Mm-hmm. It makes you sick. It makes you resentful. It makes you crabby.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Repression is one of the most dangerous things we can do to ourselves. So
I think so. I think that oppression of ourselves and our creative desires is very tempting, though, because the brain doesn't care if you create. The brain just cares if you have enough salt and glucose and caffeine.
Absolutely. Well, it can be so easy for our inner critic to tell us that it's too late or that we don't have enough time. And one of the best case studies as to why that's bullshit is Angeline Boulley, what an amazing interview. Novelist of The Firekeeper's Daughter, a project that was just optioned by the Obamas for Netflix. Let's listen to Angeline talk about getting what some might consider a later start in creative success.
And I worked as a federal contractor on a couple different projects for Department of Ed. And I would be in the room when conversations would be had about the type of director that they needed. And it was the realization that I would be the best person, that that I would be the best person for this job, and going for it, and knowing that I was the right person in the right place, and had the right background to really own that. And that's not confidence that I had when I was younger by any means. And that's why I'm glad that that it wasn't ready to be published until I am who I am today, because that same confidence came through in that last draft that I wrote when I went and got an agent and the book deal. The confidence in the choices, the artistic choices that I made, the craft decisions that I made, that came through in my writing. And so when I would talk with prospective agents or editors that were interested in, acquiring the publishing rights, I could speak with confidence. And I think that was something that had them sit up and take notice, to be a debut author, but yet to be solidly behind my convictions of why I wrote what I wrote.
I loved talking to her so much. Like, she's the kind of person, I want to sit down and have dinner with everybody that I've talked to, but she exuded that self-trust, and she fought for it in her life. She talks about, when I was working on this project, no one was going to tell me that it wasn't worthy, and no one was going to tell me to take it in a direction I didn't believe in. And as an indigenous Native woman, I can see how she's had to work so much harder to claim that self-trust and to work her way up in the Department of Indian Education. Wow. Talk about bureaucracy. So that really stuck with me too. Like, own what you've been through and bring it to your creative choices.
And I think the other side of that coin is give yourself permission to be happy where you are. Because I think for what she said that was so important was like, if I had tried to publish this book in my 30s, it wouldn't have been the beautiful, complete, experiential work of art that it is now. And it probably wouldn't have gotten optioned by the Obamas.
And debuted #1 on the New York Times, and had Reese Witherspoon choose it for her book club, and been named so many best book of the year lists. Yeah, she's just continued to soar with it. And it's a really great story. I couldn't put it down. And my husband loved it too.
Yeah, amazing book. But I think it could be so easy, like if you are that mom right now with 4 kids who feels like you never have time for your project, maybe the creative gods are telling you, be a mom right now, learn, take all that in, put it into your creative toolbox, and know that in 5 years, when you write that novel about the beautiful messiness of motherhood, it will be so much better now than it would have been then.
Yeah, well said, Jeff. In fact, I had a conversation with a client, former client, worked with me last year, and we ended up having dinner with a group of people recently, as one can do now when one is vaccinated. And I said the exact same thing to her, because she's just pushing herself, and she has a full-time therapy practice and a young child. And I'm like, there's no hurry. The project will be there,
right.
Yeah. And I wish I would have been able to tell myself that more when I was raising Lily and, a young mom.
Yeah, that's hard, because it feels like, and in some ways it is the most important thing we have, is our creative outlet. But
it's hard to be patient with it.
It's hard to be patient. And I think just remembering that living life is what informs our creativity. So give yourself permission to do that too, I think.
And also for those of you who listening who are professionals, which I have made my living as a creative for 30 plus years, sometimes we don't have that option. And that can be really frustrating, to say, I want to slow down, but I can't because I need to make this much money. Those are hard times too.
Well, one of the things I've loved, and that I think makes this show particularly special, is you're not afraid to ask those money questions.
Yeah, I'm always blushing though when I do. I feel like you're talking about that thing you're not supposed to talk about.
It does feel that. Why do you think there's so much panic around financial conversations?
I don't know, maybe it's a Puritan thing. I have two really good girlfriends and we run together and I'll talk openly about how much money I make.
Mm-hmm.
They never say a word back.
Scary.
They just kind of look at me with really big eyes and I'm like, okay, you don't have to say anything, but like, why is that any different than us why would you leave that out of our friendships?
Totally. Well, it's been really illuminating to hear. I think we have this vision that once a professional artist gets their #1 New York Times bestseller, they move into a mansion and this is their new life. But, we've heard creatives whose books are taught in colleges and universities and optioned by production companies say like, it's still hard. I still have this other job. Like,
right. Or I'm still getting grants or the cobbling together. Krista Couture was a good one about that. She's Canadian. She's a Indigenous Canadian woman and she gets grants. And that was a mind blower for me because I've never applied for a grant, but that's a real Canadian possibility in other countries, possibility as a way to support yourself. Fellowships. Anne Murphy Paul has a lot of fellowships in her bio. And one of the ways that she cobbles together teaching comes up a lot.
Jen, do you think your kind of hesitancy around grant applications and fellowships has to do with your, I'm going to just pick it all up on my back and do it myself element of your creative personality?
Yeah. Also, I grew up in an entrepreneurial, multi-generational entrepreneur household. And so those are the stories I was raised on. In fact, when I got a straight job right out of college, I got a job as a literary assistant to a literary agent. And I called my dad, I got my first real job out of film school. And he's like, there's silence on the other end of the phone. And then he said, why did you do that?
Wow.
Why did you get a job? I thought you wanted to be a writer. I'm like, yeah. Well, he also thought like writers make millions.
No.
Yeah, just slightly. True enough. Some of the people I went to school with got right out of the gate and started making a ton of money, but us mere mortals did not. Yeah.
That's interesting. I have a little bit of that too. And I think that hesitancy sometimes to apply for grants or ask for help, that can be a little toxic in your creative process because I think with your creativity, it feels like you have to author all of it because you have such a strong or particular vision for what you want, which you need as a creative, but like, don't be afraid to let people in,
Yeah. And if you watch one of my favorite Netflix TV shows, Call My Agent, which is a French show, it's all about state money. They're always getting state money and they kind of lead you into this process of, it's very arcane and interesting and weird in French. And I'm like, wow, how different is that than what goes on in America? So yeah, I think part of it is also just opening our eyes to what's possible. And that's part of what I'm trying to do with the show is just say, look, there's all kinds of models out there for how to survive and how to make it.
I mean, when you think about our listeners, do you have like a single biggest takeaway that you hope they leave with, particularly for this first season?
That's a good question, Jeff. I think there's a determination that all of our guests have shown, a determination that burns deep inside of them. There's something that motivates them to create, and there's an essence to it. And everybody's essence is a little different, but it's there and it's real and it's worth it. And you are in that company. You are no different than Annie Lamont. You are no different than Rissi Palmer. You are no different than Maggie Shipstead, Kate Baer, all the people. You're no different. So feel that burning, tend it, take it seriously, but hold it lightly.
That is beautiful. I don't know if there's a better way to go out than that. That's amazing, Jen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being there with me and helping this happen. And wait for season 2. And we have gotten new guests and new ideas up our sleeve. And don't forget to subscribe so you know when it starts, because we don't really know when it'll start.
It'll be soon, though. We can't wait to come back. So for now, thanks for enjoying Create Out Loud Season 1, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody.